Så, god morgon och välkomna alla till ETI Sveriges webbinarium om könsbaserat våld och trakasserier i globala leverantörsled. Jag kommer byta till engelska då vi har en internationell panel med oss. Så innan jag lämnar över till dem för att börja dagens webbinarium så tänkte jag berätta kort om ETI Sverige. So, welcome to ETI Sweden's webinar on gender-based violence and harassment in global supply chains. My name is Henrik Lindholm and I'm the director of ETI Sweden. ETI Sweden is a multi-stakeholder organization working on human rights and working conditions in global supply chains. As a multi-stakeholder organization, we bring together businesses from different sectors together with trade unions and NGOs working on these issues. One of the most important issues we are working on are gender issues in global supply chains. Now, with us today, we have three experts within this field who will be discussing and giving their different perspectives on how we can tackle the issues of gender-based violence and harassment in global supply chain. And we're very happy that we have different stakeholders here presenting today. We have Bergold, Senior Analyst at the Department of Welfare, Education and Labor Market Education at LO, the Swedish Trade Union Federation. We have Sonia, Wazed, who works as Head of Programs at the Society for Labor and Development in New Delhi, India. She has over 16 years of working on labor rights and the intersection with gender issues and women's rights in both India and Bangladesh. And we have Isadora Loreto, Manager at Business for Social Responsibilities, HERproject, a collaborative initiative to empower low-income women working in global supply chains. So with us today, we have both trade unions, labor rights NGOs, and business initiatives working to tackle these topics. We will start with Bergold giving us an insight into ILO Convention 119 on violence and harassment, which was agreed on this summer. So she'll give us the big perspective on this. And after that, we'll invite Sonia to talk about her experience from working on these issues in India. And finally, Isadora will give us an example of how businesses are trying to tackle this in global supply chain. So hopefully we'll have different perspectives on the issues from the big to the very concrete on the ground. There will be plenty of time for questions and discussions at the end. However, don't hesitate to raise any questions in the chat during the presentations, and we'll pick them up either after each presentation or at the end during the panel discussion. So, welcome.
Thank you. And perhaps I should say that I am going to do my presentation in Swedish.
Yes.
And I will give an overview. I'll change to Swedish. Ja, tack så hemskt mycket för inbjudan och få komma hit och berätta om ILO-konvention 190. Mitt uppdrag idag, eller som jag tänker mig, att jag kommer att ge en översikt helt enkelt över konventionen på ett väldigt enkelt sätt för att visa på vilka delar som ingår och vilka frågor man behöver jobba med. Kort bara om varför just jag gör det här. Jag jobbar som sagt då som utredare och analytiker på LO, men jag har varit en del av arbetet med att ta fram ILO-konvention 190 eller från LOs sida, och har varit aktiv i ITUC, alltså det globala fackets förarbete. Och sen under det senaste dryga året suttit med i den statliga utredning som har sett över konventionen i relation till svensk lagstiftning, alltså i den ratificeringsprocess som då pågår i Sverige. Och kan väl berätta då att i förrgår, den 26 oktober, så presenterades den här utredningen som föreslår att Sverige ska och kan ratificera konvention 190, och det är ju väldigt, väldigt glädjande. Samtidigt som jag kommer att återkomma till kanske en slutreflektion att det finns saker som behöver stärkas, och det finns vissa frågor som jag tror är relevanta i Sverige, men som jag också tror är relevanta internationellt. Men jag kommer att visa en presentation och ge lite bakgrund och en översikt över hur konventionen är uppbyggd. Nu ska vi se om jag lyckas med detta. Där. Ja. Och då går vi tillbaka. Vi får se om jag lyckas med detta. Ja, där, titta. Här har vi ILO-konvention 190, avskaffande av våld och trakasserier i arbetslivet. Och vad man kan säga, jag kan gå tillbaka. Det man kan säga om just den, att det blev just avskaffande av våld och trakasserier, och att könsbaserat våld och trakasserier inte finns med i själva begreppet eller själva namnet, var ju en diskussion som fanns med redan från början. Men så att säga, det här är vad den kommer att heta, våld och trakasserier, och har ett väldigt brett grepp just på hela skalan av våld och trakasseringsbeteenden, men där könsbaserat våld ändå fick en viktig del. Korta, de flesta av er är säkert helt informerade om detta, men om vi tar en kort bakgrund med ILO, så är det FNs organ för sysselsättnings- och arbetslivsfrågor, ett trepartsorgan med medlemsstater, arbetsgivarorganisationer och fackliga organisationer. Och vad man arbetar framförallt med är ju att skapa internationella normer för arbetslivet på olika sätt. Och de här konventionerna ratificeras av medlemsstaterna, och då sätter ju detta igång en process av uppföljning och kontroll helt enkelt. Så att, av hur väl man uppfyller konventionerna och de krav som ställs. Och det här är ju i sig någonting som påverkar och ställer krav på medlemsstaternas arbete med normerna eller förbättringar i arbetslivet. Så att själva ratificeringsprocessen är viktig i sig, men sen är det själva uppföljningen av hur väl medlemsstaterna efterföljer konventionerna som är en otroligt viktig del av arbetet och det fortsatta arbetet med de mål och krav som ställs. Och förutom det här så finns det kärnkonventioner om bland annat föreningsrätt och förbud mot tvångs- och barnarbete som är viktiga instrument på den globala arbetslivet. Så lite bakgrund då om ILO-konvention 190. Det här här ser vi från Industry All en bild från kampanjen om ILO-konventionen. It can change lives. Och det är verkligen, det här är en fråga, nu talar jag utifrån ett fackföreningsperspektiv, men som har bubblat så länge och funnits med och påverkat villkoren för ett rimligt, ett decent working life helt enkelt. Så att vara med vid ITUC och det globala fackets arbete inför ILOs arbetskonferenser 2018 och 2019, för det här var en 2-årig process. Det var väldigt berörande ska jag säga. För det fanns en sån stark önskan och en sån stark vilja av att faktiskt få någonting på plats som hade potential att förändra de väldigt hårda arbetsvillkor som arbetare, kvinnliga arbetare men också manliga arbetare lever under överallt i världen. Vi säger att våld och trakasserier i arbetslivet är ju inte bara, finns ju inte bara på en plats i världen eller på en plats i arbetslivet, utan vi kan ju se att det här påverkar över hela spektrat. Och i det här arbetet så blev ju också MeToo-rörelsen, kunde vi se väldigt tydligt, en väldigt viktig drivkraft. Vi kan tänka att vi som glömmer bort den, eller att det kom 2017, det drog igång, liksom fanns med 2018 och sen så har det fallit bort. Men jag skulle ändå vilja säga att den här rörelsen fick en avgörande betydelse för hur väl och hur starkt man kunde flytta fram på sina positioner inför arbetet på ILOs arbetskonferenser om den här frågan. Men samtidigt så var det ju en väldigt stormig beslutsprocess och det har funnits väldigt starka åsikter, motkrafter om att det här inte behövs, eller att man upplevde att det här skulle vara ett för tvingande ingrepp i arbetsgivares ansvar, men också som kritiken har kommit, möjligheter att faktiskt kunna påverka eller förhindra våld och trakasseri i arbetslivet. Var går gränsen för vad man kan göra? Men här blev det ändå en konvention som tog ett brett grepp och ringar in stora delar och viktiga delar av arbetslivet som inte bara handlar om den här situationen på arbetsplatsen mellan arbetskamrater som vi ofta kan, som man ofta landar i, utan som jag ska visa lite senare, ett väldigt mycket bredare grepp. Så konventionen börjar gälla 12 månader efter att 2 medlemsstater har ratificerat den. Och Uruguay var först ut i januari 2020. Och sedan dess har Argentina, Ecuador, Fiji, Namibia och Somalia också ratificerat den. Och nu 26 oktober 21, som jag sa, så föreslås Sverige också ratificera konventionen. Och det är ett väldigt, väldigt viktigt steg för att också driva på fortsatta ratificeringar från andra medlemsländer. Så vad innehåller den då? Alltså vad är det den ska skydda mot ILO-konvention 190? Jo, den ska skydda mot ett spektrum av oacceptabla beteenden och handlingar eller hot om handling. Så att det kan vara ett väldigt brett spektrum. Här preciserar man inte att det handlar om våld eller hot om våld, utan det kan vara, det ska fånga in både tydligt hotfulla eller liksom skarpa situationer, men även det mer subtila, det som ligger kanske i jargong eller det behöver inte ens vara en handling, utan det kan vara ett hot om handling. Det kan handla om beteenden som sker en eller upprepade gånger, så det behöver inte handla om att det här sker flera gånger, utan det kan vara en gång det sker. Det som också, de beteenden som ringas in ska syfta till eller kan syfta till, resulterar i eller kan resultera i fysisk, psykologisk, sexuell eller ekonomisk skada. Så det är ju inte bara den fysiska delen, utan det handlar ju också, det är otroligt viktigt att man har ringat in den här bredare definitionen där också ekonomiskt våld får plats och ska inbegripas i medlemsstaternas skydd. Trakasserierna, det som ska skyddas, man ska skyddas mot, inbegriper också könsbaserat våld och trakasserier och sexuella trakasserier. Så att istället för att bli den övergripande rubriken eller övergripande syftet, så ingår könsbaserat våld och trakasserier och sexuella trakasserier som en definition, så att säga, vad man ska skyddas mot. Och en sista aspekt av vad konventionen kräver är att medlemsstaterna ska erkänna konsekvenserna av våld i nära relationer och sträva efter att minska dess påverkan på arbetslivet. För det här ser vi ju också är en typ av våld och trakasserier som på ett väldigt konkret sätt påverkar människors möjligheter att delta i arbetslivet och försörja sig på rimliga och vettiga villkor. Så här är också en väldigt viktig del av konventionen som kom med in, men som ligger så att säga lite i utkanten av själva arbetslivsfrågorna har vissa, och resonerar fortfarande vissa, men det är väldigt viktigt att den kom med. Vilka eller vem är det då som skyddas? Ja, även här finns ett väldigt brett tag så att säga. Och det handlar ju om arbetstagare och anställda enligt nationell praxis och nationell lagstiftning och praxis. Men inte bara arbetstagare och anställda utan även yrkesutbildande, praktikanter, lärlingar, uppsagda, volontärer och platssökande. Det handlar om arbetande oavsett vilken arbetsrättslig status de har. Man inkluderar också personer som har en arbetsgivarroll. Så om du är chef på en organisation eller arbetsledare, även då så ska du skyddas via den här konventionen. Och konventionen gäller också oavsett var man arbetar. Om man arbetar i privat och offentlig sektor, om man arbetar i den formell ekonomi eller informell ekonomi. Den ska gälla lika oavsett om man jobbar på stad eller land. Och var då? Det här är också en väldigt den är en bred definition var man skyddas. En otroligt viktig, jag tror att vi kommer att komma in på det längre fram i diskussionen. För det är en konvention som har till syfte att liksom fånga upp väldigt många olika typer av arbetsrelaterade situationer. Och det ställer ju också krav på arbetsgivare men också på medlemsstater att hitta ett skydd som inkluderar alla de här olika situationerna. Så att hur det definierar sig alltså situationer som inträffar i, är knutna till eller härrör från arbete. Man är skyddad på arbetsplatsen, inklusive offentliga eller privata platser om arbetet utförs där. Arbetar du som torgförsäljare så ska skyddet gälla där. Arbetar du som hembiträde i någons hem eller rörmokare i någons hem så ska konventionen gälla även där. Konventionen ska gälla för utrymmen där man får sin lön utbetald, man har rast, man äter sin måltid eller andra typer av hygienutrymmen, omklädningsrum, tvättrum och så vidare. Så även här gäller den. Den ska också gälla i kommunikationer i olika typer av IT-sammanhang, sociala medier och så vidare. Det här är ju en väldigt viktig fråga för många såklart, eftersom mycket av arbetet vi utförs till exempel så här som jag gör idag, pratar på ett webbinarium och vi träffas digitalt. Journalister har ju länge upplevt att man har blivit att det är ett problem med våld och trakasserier just i kommunikationskanaler. Men jag tror att det här gäller allt fler och stora delar av arbetsmarknaden. Arbetsrelaterade resor, om du går på utbildningar, after work, sådana saker, men som på något vis har en relation till arbetet. Den ska också inkluderas. Och resor till och från arbetet, pendlingssituationer, boenden kopplat till arbetet om du har ett boende tillhandahållet av din arbetsgivare till exempel. Och hur ska man göra det? Jo, man ska göra det helhetsinriktat i samråd med arbetsmarknadens parter och anpassad efter nationell lagstiftning. Så här finns ju en utgångspunkt i att, som vanligt, men att anpassa konventionens implementering i nationell lagstiftning. Man ska också, det här tror jag är en väldigt viktig fråga som vi kommer få anledning att återkomma till från och med nu och framöver. Konventionen skriver att i tillämpliga fall, where applicable, så ska man inbegripa våld och trakasserier från tredje man. Till svenska har det här överförsatts i tillämpliga fall och vi förstår det som att, så att säga, där, och då säger jag fackföreningsrörelsen, där våld och trakasserier från tredje man förekommer, där ska också det inkluderas i skyddet. Jag har uppfattat att det finns lite olika tolkningar kring, så att säga, hur väl integrerat våld och trakasserier från tredje man är. Och inte minst har vi fört en sån diskussion i ett svenskt sammanhang. Men man ska också förbjuda våld och trakasserier i arbetslivet genom lag. Man ska se till att det finns relevanta policies och förebyggande arbeten på plats inom andra typer av politikområden. Och på arbetsplatserna så ska det finnas på plats. Förlåt, nu har det kommit en från förra här. Men det som också ska finnas är mekanismer för efterlevnad och kontroll. Rättsmedel och sanktioner, verktyg och utbildning och granskning och utredning och kontroll av uppföljning. Både då, så att säga, nationellt, men såklart också kommer den granskning och kontrollen från ILO-håll. Så att en överlag väldigt bred konvention som har potential att fånga in väldigt många av de situationer som vi vet är problematiska. Samtidigt en bred konvention som gör det möjligt, så att säga, eller gör det, som kan uppfattas som kanske svårt för arbetsgivare och stat att helt kontrollera, om jag då ska gå utifrån de diskussioner som vi har haft på svensk nivå. Så jag tänkte bara göra några korta reflektioner från den svenska implementeringsprocessen som ju ännu inte är klar. Men det är viktigt med en snabb ratificering, att man ser till att man får den här ratificeringen från medlemsstaterna. För det innebär ju, som jag sa tidigare, en påbyggnad av kontroll och uppföljning från ILO och också en möjlighet att utveckla politiken och utveckla skyddet över tid. Så att en rask ratificering från medlemsstaterna stärker konventionen. Men, står det här, och fortsättningen skulle vara, men det kan finnas en poäng med att inte vara allt för snabba. Alltså att ge möjligheten till den här systematiska genomlysningen på nationell nivå. Och det är så vi har sett det. Att genom att, så att säga, ha tagit lite tid för att se men hur väl överensstämmer svensk lagstiftning med konventionen, så har vi också fått syn på glapp och brister som ger en möjlighet till mobilisering och opinionsbildning för framtida och ganska snara förändringar. Att kunna säga att men här behöver vi få förändringar på plats. Det som står balanserar åt liksom i den andra delen av vågskålen är ju just att värnandet av den existerande lagstiftningen kan ju minska utrymmet, och gör det också av liksom direkta akuta förbättringar. Så det här är två delar som jag ser i den processen vi har haft i Sverige. Jag ska inte säga att de har balanserat varandra, men har funnits på två olika perspektiv. Som jag sa, tredje man är en fråga där vi vet att mycket av våldet och trakasserierna i arbetslivet generellt över hela världen sker från tredje man. Och i värsta fall så finns det en oklarhet i hur väl man faktiskt är skyddad från tredje man och vem som har liksom möjlighet att skydda arbetstagare från tredje man. En annan fråga är när det sker utanför arbetstid, utanför arbetsplatsen. Hur kommer man agera för att kunna stärka upp det skyddet? Och en enormt stor fråga är ju hur kommer skyddet ändå att kunna utvecklas i den informella sektorn? Så att det här är tre delar av konventionen, bland många, men 3 delar av konventionen som jag tror är väldigt viktigt att fortsätta följa upp. Så att bara den kontenta som kom ut av den svenska utredningen, det är så att svensk lag Och Sverige uppfyller konventionens krav och vi kan ratificera den. Men man la till en aspekt, en artikel är föreslagen att läggas till i arbetsmiljölagen. Och det var att arbetsmiljön ska så långt som det är möjligt vara fri från våld och trakasserier. Det här är en formulering som, ja, man kan fortsätta diskutera den, men vi är från LOs sida och från TCO och SACOs sida tämligen kritiska mot den här formuleringen, eftersom vi upplever att den faktiskt snarare, så att säga, istället för att förstärka ett förbud mot våld och trakasserier i svensk lagstiftning, så att säga undergräver det lite grann av syftet. Men vi återkommer och vi kommer att fortsätta jobba med de frågorna och för att få till ett bra stöd internationellt men också nationellt. Tack, jag slutar där och tackar för att ni har lyssnat och hoppas att jag har slutat dela.
Det har du. Det var väldigt intressant. Thanks a lot, Johan, for this presentation on Convention 190 and a bit also about what it will mean when it becomes implemented and in Sweden, and maybe we can come back to what it will mean in other countries as well during our discussion at the end. And now I'd like to invite Sonia from SLD to give her presentation on this topic. I will start sharing your presentation. Right, I think you have the presentation in front of you.
Yes, Henrik, thank you so much. Yes, so I think before I actually start talking about gender-based violence and our experience of working with garment workers in different parts of India, I would like to briefly talk about the organization I work with. So it is called Society for Labor and Development, and we prefer calling it SLD in short. It is a labor rights and a labor support organization based in Delhi. It was established in 2006 with the mission to empower workers and their families to be self-reliant and to live a life of dignity. Next slide, please. Yes, so this is basically for a picture of the workers that we work with, and we were just trying to help them understand how they can use their mobile phones to generate complaints in cases they have any workplace violation. So one of the things that we do is we basically inform workers on their rights, and we realize that most of these workers are migrant workers and they come to the city in search of jobs, so they are practically unaware of the kinds of rights they have at workplace. Understanding about your right is not useful always unless you have the capacity to access them. So we possibly give them the support to access their rights, and as a result, we have seen in many cases it has had a positive impact on their lives. So next slide. Yes, so we work with domestic workers, garment workers, leather workers, and seafood processing industry workers in different parts of India. And most of these workers are migrant workers who possibly also come from socially disadvantaged communities. So here we see an intersection of poverty and being basically coming from disadvantaged communities, where they are also, and as a result of that, they also face multiple levels of discrimination, not only at their workplace, but also in the communities that they stay within the destination area. Next slide, please. Yes. So how does the garment industry in India look like? We have around 45 million people directly working within the garment industry, and 65 million people work indirectly. So here, when I say 65 million people, it basically talks about people who are also in allied industries like dyes and other, like threads and all of that. So nationally, we have around 60 to 80% women who are employed in the garment sector. And what we've seen that women are usually hired as helpers, engaging in things like thread cutting, ironing, buttoning, packaging. And in most cases, as a result of this, they end up getting low wages. So women workers are usually not preferred as supervisors, and we have observed this within the interaction that we have with both men and women workers, and they've said that women actually have to manage their homes. They cannot basically manage both their homes and their factories. And we've seen that there's a preference for men supervisors, not only within the workforce, but also from the management. So as a result, women fail to access, they fail to basically rise up the ladder, and there is possibly no scope for vertical mobility as well within their workspaces. There is a preference for a younger women workforce. That means women between the age group of 18 to 30 are preferred in the garment industry. And we have clearly seen that women beyond the age of 35 or 40 years are basically either laid off, or they are coerced to leave their jobs, because gradually the garment industry feels that they are not very useful for them. We came up with this concept of mining the bodies, which means that the productive years of a woman, a garment worker, is basically used in working in the garment industry. And when the industry feels that that she has uh, uh, possibly she's slowed down, or she cannot offer what they want, they are laid off. And most of these workers, after they are laid off or terminated at the age of 35 and 40, get back to informal work spaces. That means they either become domestic workers, or they start selling vegetables. So here we do see different forms of gender-based violence, which is just not at workplace, but it is beyond workplace also. Next slide, please. Yes, so this is basically a word cloud, and it has a lot of words which has come as which we have basically gathered from our conversations with the workers in course of trainings, in course of focus group discussions, and they are not very they're not very easy, actually. I mean, you will see words like bullying and pulling and pushing and slapping and sexual abuse and sexual advances, harassment, blacklisting. So most of beating. So these are the forms of abuse that women actually experience at the factory shop floor. And then we will, in the next slide, we will actually break it down to different forms of violence. So next slide. So I'm not sure whether you can actually read it. So we realized, speaking to different groups of people in the countries that actually produce garments for different brands, and we could categorize abuse in 5 forms. And then we said that what did we include when we were talking about acts of physical harm. So it basically meant assault, pushing on the floor, beating, slapping, kicking. And these are all real examples that actually came while interacting with the workers. So these are not something that we realized, but this is something that came out while we were doing a research on gender-based violence, and we realized that women were actually facing these kind of abuse in the shop floor. So, I mean, low wages and long hours of work, and it was very common, and in most cases, they were not even given overtime. So any work hours which is beyond 8 hours can be considered as a form of forced labor if it is not well remunerated. But women were also very, very scared to even talk about their rights at workplace, even if they knew about it. So when we thought that what can we categorize as mental harm, then verbal abuse, and it was like general abuse, public humiliation, and there would be abuse linked to their caste or social group. And as I mentioned in my previous slide, there were verbal abuse targeting senior women workers, and they were asked to voluntarily resign so that they would not receive the benefits that they were entitled to. And that obviously had a mental impact on the women, and they thought, and in many cases they expressed that it affected their productivity because they were not feeling comfortable working in that work area. And when we talk about the acts of sexual harm, so there were sexual advances from the management, from machine mechanics, from co-workers, and women faced retaliation whenever they actually said that we would go up and report to the higher management. So it also involved unwanted physical touch and touching and pulling and bodily contact by managers and male workers. So this form of abuse was just not restricted to the factory. We've seen that in many cases when the women workers actually work late and they are on their way back home, in many cases the supervisors actually stop their bikes and they tell them that why don't I can give you a lift, why don't you come with me to a restaurant, why don't you actually come to my room. So what I'm trying to say is that the forms of violence are just not within the factory. I think we need to have an expansive understanding of violence which is beyond the workspace, which includes public spaces, which includes their homes as well. And when we asked women that, yes, what you are facing is very, very difficult, and it has an impact on your mental well-being, and why don't you actually report about such cases? So they expressed that they were feared. They did not want to talk about cases or register complaints because they were afraid of the fact that they would lose their job, because there was a lot of retaliation when women would actually report gender-based violence and harassment. Some women were blacklisted from work because, and we've seen that there were women who actually had the courage to go up and register a complaint, and so those women were not taken by any other factory later on because they were labeled as problem makers. So there was this whole element of blacklisting those women workers who would actually go up to the management or to the internal committee and would register complaint against the specific managers or supervisors. So this also prevented other women from not registering the cases. The easier route was actually leaving the factory and going to another factory, but the other factory would also not offer them any safe workspaces. And the other form of abuse that we recognized was deprivation of liberty. So women were actually forced to work in their lunch hours. They were prevented from taking bathroom breaks. In many cases, they were not allowed to drink when the production target was very high. They're not allowed to drink water, because if they would drink water, they would actually go to the bathrooms. And I know that, for a matter of fact, many factories actually issue token to women workers to control how many times they're going to the bathrooms, and that amount of time is calculated, and she's asked to work more to compensate for the bathroom breaks that she takes. And they were not allowed to take leave entitlements, which also includes maternity benefit. So in most cases, what we have seen, the moment a woman gets pregnant and the management comes to know about it, they will look for one reason or the other to actually throw her out of the factory so that they do not have to give her the maternity leave that she is entitled to. Next slide. So what we did, what SLD did was, we started talking to women workers, and we realized that most women workers could not identify the different forms of violence. So there was a huge level of impunity. There was a culture of impunity where women workers actually felt that it is normal. They were normalizing violence. And so it became very difficult for us because they said that it happens. It happens in all factories. Wherever you work, this is the culture. So we actually had to train them. We had to build their capacity to understand what are the different forms of violence, to sustained training. And I will not say that, yes, they still have a clarity about what is verbal abuse, what is physical, what is sexual, what is coercion, threat, deprivation of liberty. But at the same time, they possibly can now identify that, yes, this has happened to me and this is a form of abuse. And I think they are very shy to discuss any form of abuse because they somehow feel that they are responsible for being treated like the way they are, because they think that, yes, maybe their counterpart are not treated otherwise. Maybe there is no sexual advance that one woman would face within the chain, but whereas another woman will face. So then there is an element of, like, okay, that, she's been advanced, there is sexual advances made to her, but not to me. So suddenly this whole concept of purity and pollution comes into being, because you think that, yes, she has done something, why the supervisor would come and approach her, and possibly I am actually sticking to my work and not doing anything else. And that's why I'm not being approached by anyone sexually or physically. So they are not comfortable talking about violence. So the different levels of intervention is actually required to make them speak about different forms of violence. Some women feared that if they actually shared this information outside the factory and the factory management would come to know about it, they might experience illegal termination. So that was also the reason why they did not want to open up. And we realized that with time, women opened up and they realized that it is not an individual problem. So it was not that I am facing this problem because maybe there's some problem with me, but it is something that everybody within the supply chain, within the factory, is facing this problem, and it is a social issue that needs to be addressed. So what happened next was women started opening up, and we have interacted with women across different sectors, in different geographies, and they shared that 100% of the women workers shared that they faced verbal abuse on a regular basis. And 60 to 7% of the women shared that they face physical abuse, like a piece of cloth being thrown on their face, and pushing and pulling and shoving. And 10 to 20% shared that they had faced sexual abuse, but most workers were uncomfortable to talk about sexual harm in any way because it was considered taboo. And the moment they felt that it is out in the open, their families would also not allow them to come to work. So they were also scared of those repercussions. And there was a threat of termination in cases of non-compliance. So they were supposed to keep quiet and work and tolerate all the abuse. And the moment they would talk about it, they will actually be seen as somebody who's non-compliant and will be thrown out of the job. Next slide, please. Yes, so going forward, I think what we can do is what we are trying to do, we are providing constant training to the women garment workers to understand what gender-based violence at workplace is. And it so happened that it came as a result of these trainings and conversations that they felt that their male counterparts should be trained on gender-based violence as well, because they are the one who are possibly seen as perpetrators within their supply chain. So if we are actually talking about creating safe workspaces for women, it is essential for the male counterparts to be trained as well. At the company level grievance mechanisms, and here I'm talking about, we have a law on sexual harassment at workplace, and the law mandates that any organization who has more than 10 staff, they need to have an internal committee to look into these matters of sexual harassment. But however, in reality, the company level grievance mechanisms are not very active. So in most cases, the workers rights are not addressed at the workplace, because they do not know who the members are in this internal committee, what is the function of this internal committee, and in case they face sexual harassment, where could they go? Because most of them are semi-literate, literate, so they cannot read and write the instructions given in the common spaces. So this is also a very big problem. So that means the companies are not proactively thinking about gender-based violence, and it is more like a tick box activity, just because the government says that you need to have these informations available for the workers to see. It's there, but it's not very useful. Most companies should follow a preventive model, but what we have seen that it is more of a remedial model. If you look at different cases of gender-based violence and there's rape and murder that's happening in the garment supply chain, you will see that they act on it when it is already too late. When a woman garment worker is already raped and murdered, then there's nothing that you could do. Rather than acting on actually covering up such cases, it's essential that you start working on making responsible supply chains so that women feel comfortable, they're safe workspaces, and they can actually talk about their problems at ease. The social audits that are conducted are basically on-site, which prevents the workers from talking about their problems openly, because you'll always have the factory management around. So it makes it very difficult to open up in such cases. There are several recommendations where it is important that the social audit should be conducted off-site also, to understand the real problems of the workers. It needs more investment, but of course then it will actually give value to these social audits. And now the social audits are basically a ploy by the buyers to say, yes, we are conducting social audits, and everything looks fine, but that's not the real case. We need to ensure transparency in supply chains to address any form of human rights violation. That includes gender-based violence as well. So most companies do not want to talk about it. Most buyers and most suppliers do not want to talk about gender-based violence, because they're more interested in increasing their production and catering to the buyers, rather than actually improving the supply chain so that there are better labor practices. So we also feel that there should be stricter restrictions on the suppliers to adhere to the buyer's code of conduct. I think the buyer's code of conduct is just a piece of paper, and I don't think it is actually of any use, because most of them do not even know. The HR managers don't know what the buyer's code of conduct talks about. Buyers should closely work with the suppliers and bring about a sustainable supply chain. And in most cases, what we've seen, the moment the buyers see that there's some discrepancy, some problem in the supply chain, they cut and run. This is not going to work. They need to stick to the supplier. They need to improve the supply chain, because every time you cut and run, it is not actually impacting. It's not only making any positive difference in the supplier's situation. The EU law should have a binding framework which can be imposed through effective sanctions on the companies that breach the provisions. So we need to have a mandatory adoption of human rights due diligence by the EU, and it is a positive step taken forward to ensure there is responsible business. India has still not ratified the C190, and we would encourage the government to ratify C190 and demand brands to abide by the standards set by it. So I think if we actually talk about very big changes, it's very difficult to implement. So it's essential to start with incremental changes that can positively impact the lives of the workers working in the garment supply chain. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. And these are the garment workers we work with, and they are holding a placard which is written in Hindi, and they're saying that, we should stop violence against women. So that's what it says. Thank you, Henrik.
Thanks a lot. I think we'll get back to a lot of the topics you raised during your presentations at the end for our discussions. So thanks a lot again for your presentation, and I'd like to invite Isadora from BSR to talk about the HERproject initiative that you're working on.
Thank you so much, Henrik, and thank you so much, Sonia. I think what you presented was so interesting and is really great context to actually our work at HERproject. So it's really great to be here with everyone today, and I'm going to now present our initiative HERproject. So as Henrik said, I'm Isadora and I work at BSR HERproject, and our flagship initiative in terms of gender-based violence and addressing sexual harassment is HERproject. So here just a little bit of what we're going to cover, but I think just jumping in the interest of time. So I think some of you might be familiar with what HERproject is, but just to give a little bit of an overview, HERproject is a program that looks at empowering women, and it's a collaborative initiative that works in global supply chains. So we put women workers really at the center, as you can see here at the top of the screen, and we work together with brands and companies. We work in farms and factories, and together with also our local partners, our NGO partners that deliver our training in factories and in farms. We have had an impact of over 1 million women since we started HERproject more than 10 years ago. And since then, we have been working in more than 900 factories and farms, and together in partnership with more than 70 companies. We have different programs. So today I'm going to focus on HERproject, our program that promotes gender equality and tackling violence. But we also have other programs such as HERhealth that focuses on health. We have HERfinance that focuses on financial inclusion. We have HERessentials that focuses on building workers' resilience in the face of the COVID-19 crisis. And we have HERmanagement. So maybe looking at what is HERproject, and I think the two speakers gave really great context to this our program. And to start with, I think what motivates usually companies and the different stakeholders to engage with us at HERproject are the different reasons that were mentioned by the two other speakers. So, first of all, how you can engage and how you can respond to some of the regulatory pressures that we have heard of, the convention, the C119, and also the several other acts that exist, just mentioning the POSH Act, for example, in India. At the same time, of course, some companies want to also engage with us because they want to engage in a concrete initiative where they can really make a difference in their supply chain. And so HERproject is really there to make sure that, gender-based violence, sexual harassment is addressed within the workplace and within the supply chain. And also we have some companies that engage with us, of course, looking at the Me Too campaign and, making sure that that they address any type of concern that they have throughout their whole supply chain in addressing these issues. So those are some of the examples of, why we have had some success in engaging about this project in the supply chain. And just to give a bit of an overview of what HERproject focuses on, it's a program that really looks at two things. One thing is to build the capacity of the workers, and especially, of course, it's HERproject, so we focus a lot on the women workers, building their capacity to really, first understand, be aware of, what constitutes violence. And I think Sonia was talking about that a lot, the fact that there is no awareness about what even constitutes violence, that the fact that there is normalization of violence. And, so just the first thing that we do is to really, raise awareness about that, but not only, also what we try to equip workers with is to be, to reflect on the different gender norms that exist and to, understand also how they can act. So what are the processes and policies in place, but also how to have more harmonious relationship, and understanding that violence is not okay, but also that how you can have different type of relationships. And for that, we don't only engage with workers, of course, we also engage with supervisors, with management, because the goal is to really build a different type of workplace and to help everyone to communicate differently within the workplace. So it's really looking at tackling the culture, as Sonia was explaining just before, that there is often in factories and farms of normalizing this type of communication and violence. And at the same time, of course, what we want to make sure also is that for any person that is a victim of violence within the workplace, that there are policies in place, that there are processes in place, and that everyone is aware of those. So we work very much in hand with the management of factories and farms to help them make sure that they have everything in place to address any kind of cases of violence or harassment at the workplace. And we do some awareness campaigns, and we also link the workplace, and especially the victims of violence to service providers outside of the factories, because we also know that this is very, very important, as Sonia was saying, just to make sure that there is the necessary support for those that are victims. So this is HERproject, and we have been working in different geographies and industries. So in terms of industries, we have been working in the garment sector, the homeware sector, and also in tea estates and smallholders. So as you can see here, the countries where we have worked so far are Bangladesh, India, Ethiopia, and Kenya. So we have worked in over 60, close to 60 workplaces, and we are really very interested to hear from you. And if you are interested, of course, at the end of the presentation and later on to engage with HERproject, please feel free to reach out at any moment. In terms of the program content, so like I mentioned, there are different things that we do, and it's really building the capacity on reflecting on gender norms, preventing and addressing violence. And one thing that is very specific, I think, about HERproject is that we conduct different sessions. So we separate male workers, female workers, and supervisors. And that is because, of course, given the sensitivity of the topics that we address, we want to make sure that everyone is at ease and that people feel that this is a safe space and they can really open up. But after those different sessions, we also bring together, we have joint sessions where we bring workers and management together, where they can actually reflect on what they have learned, etc. So this is a really important piece of our work to really make sure that we create dialogue and that we create awareness among the different people in the factory. In terms of strengthening management, as I mentioned, we work very closely with the management to make sure that they have the policies and the processes in place, and to have the linkage really to community services and local initiatives. This is our training curriculum, so going a bit into details here, but I think it's something that is often interesting for people to know what is it that we cover. So we really start by looking at understanding what is really like communication, and how your body language, how the way you communicate to others is actually extremely important, and how this, without you having the intention to commit violence or harassment, can lead to this type of behaviors. And as you can see, we address really violence at relationship, at home and at work only in the 4th module. And why is that? Because we really want to build awareness of people little by little, like we don't want to arrive and start by directly talking about that. We really want to create a space where everybody feels that they are comfortable and where they can really share. And so we really start about talking about like basic communication styles, understanding relationship, understanding social norms. And once we have built this foundation, we are able to really then move into the 3 modules that you see at the bottom, which are really there tackling directly what is violence and how you can, of course, address it, what to do, how you can reduce violence, how you can build positive relations, and then the last module about support networks for those that are victims of violence. So the goal is to really we call the people that receive the training the change makers, because the goal is to empower them so that they are aware of this, that they have the knowledge, the confidence to then, themselves be agents of change within the workplace. In terms of the impact of the program, so we have seen, as I said, we have been running HERproject in several places, and this is a bit of the result based on the data we collect. And we have really seen that there is overall a decrease in acceptance of, violence in all the type of forms. And again, referring to Sonia's really great presentation of the different type of violence that exists in the workplace, we have seen that thanks to programs such as HERproject, we are able to decrease acceptance of, for example, supervisor shooting at the workplace, and also to really increase an understanding of what constitutes sexual harassment. So the awareness of what is violence, what is sexual harassment, and also the relationship between men and women, and increasing the understanding of equality as well between men and women, and the fact that that violence is never okay in any kind of forms. So here are a few case stories, and I'm not going to read those because I think I will maybe bore you, but I'm sure we'll share those slides with you later on so you can read those. And I think it's really great when you hear from people. But I think this first story from Adhere is quite telling, and it really shows us, the first sentence is really, my language was very improper and did not align with the work culture and the factory. And he said, abusing for me was very normal and acceptable. And I think this really tells us a lot about the culture of, like Sonia was explaining, of using violence, and especially I think a lot of verbal abuse that is happening, and how people, when you really give them a moment to reflect, a space to understand, they are of course all very much capable of being aware and changing their behavior. So this, there is a lot of possibility to change things, even if it's a culture of, even if there is a culture of normalization and a high prevalence of violence. So I think that's what we see with HERproject, is that everyone, when we engage with people in the training, they are really willing to change, and they are willing to understand how they can have better relationships. And that is really something very inspiring that we see. So just a bit, I'm just going to quickly go through two countries where we have been working, and I think India, so that's really much, I think that connects well to what Sonia was presenting in terms of, how many people we have impacted also in India. We have worked in more than 17 factories, and the program really is structured around, of course, the implementation of the POSH Act, and really looking at making sure that, in terms of policies, everything's in place, but not only, also we want to make sure that any type of committee that is in place is functional, and that they are the correct mechanism for prevention of and redressal of sexual harassment and violence at the workplace. And we also, of course, look at having, as I said, the joint sessions, and also doing some, we have introduced specifically in India, some mass awareness sessions through street theater, and that has worked very well. So really looking at engaging people also in different ways, in creative ways, to raise awareness in the best possible way around those issues. In Kenya, I think it's interesting because what we have been doing, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we have a program called HERhealth, where we address different topics of health. And in Kenya, we have a blended model, we call it. So it's, we have different, so 4 modules from HERhealth and 4 modules from HERproject. And that has been quite efficient in Kenya to kind of really make sure that we address different topics, but that of course are very much connected, as we all know. And so that is a program that is very specific. It's an hybrid program. And for those of you that, might have a supply chain in Kenya, this is the type of program that we have developed there. And so maybe here, before I finish, and I think then we open up for questions, in terms of what's next for HERproject and what are the things we are focusing on at the moment. We are working a lot at the moment in Bangladesh and in India. That's two countries where we have new programs for HERproject, and that's where we are bringing some kind of new innovation. In Bangladesh, what we're doing is that we are looking, so as I said, we've been working in both countries for quite some time already, but in Bangladesh, what we have observed, and I think that links again to what Sonia was saying, is that yes, in some places, there are some maybe anti-harassment committee in some workplaces that are created. There are the policies, the processes in place, but then in terms of the members of the committees, they often don't necessarily know how to handle those cases. And specifically around counseling and supporting the victims, they don't have all the skills, including soft skills, to be there for the victims. So that's something we really aim at, like strengthening in our program. And then, as I said at the beginning, one very important thing we want to do more is facilitate linkage to external service providers to make sure that we really, because when you talk about sensitive topics like that, you might open a Pandora box, right? So people might, understand themselves that they have been victims of violence and they might feel really not at ease. And so we do our best to, of course, address this within the program, but we want to make sure that also we are able to link them to any kind of external providers that can support them further. So that is something we are going to focus on a lot through our program in Bangladesh that we are conducting this year and next year. In India, what we're doing is we're working in the tea sector, and a very interesting thing, I think, which will might interest some of you, is that we are adding a component around mental health. And why is that? Again, because of the same reasons, because of the type of issues that we address in the program. Sometimes in some places, such as in the tea sector, where it's more in remote areas, that maybe there are less external providers that can support victims of violence. We are looking at really building the capacity of the change makers themselves to respond to the type of trauma that people would have gone through. So this is really, it's called the Barefoot counseling method, and we are including this within our program, which we think is going to be very interesting for people to have this kind of concept around mental health, about how do you support when people open up in terms of, in the community, and they share with you a specific story. What do you do? How do you respond? What is your role? And how you can also help that person process any type of trauma that they have lived. So those are the things we are doing at the moment. So really, I think our main focus is to work very closely with the workplaces, with the companies that we work with in these countries, and also to make sure that we integrate this kind of topics so that the response that we give to these issues is as comprehensive as possible. And then in terms of the new geographies and collaboration, so we are looking at expanding to new geographies and locations. One country that has been on our radar for a long time is Vietnam. We have conducted a study there where we, of course, have found that there is a high demand for this kind of program. So if anyone is interested, of course, very happy to discuss that. And then just to say that HERproject has been included in our newly digital content on offer called Her Essentials. So HERproject goes beyond just what we do within the program, but also we try to take our learnings to other programs of HERproject. And also we collaborate with others within Empower at Work, which is it's a collaboration where we work together with CARE. We work together with the PAGE program from gap, and we work together with Better Work from ILO. And we try to really make sure that we coordinate and collaborate on our response, and especially around gender-based violence and sexual harassment. So thank you so much for your attention. Here are some resources that we've developed, and you will be able to have access to those once I think we send the slides. So thank you for your attention, and back to you, Henrik.
Thanks a lot for your presentation. I'd like to invite all the speakers back on the stage. So Sonia and Yua, if you could also turn on your cameras. And we'll open up for questions from the audience. Don't hesitate to raise your hand if you want to unmute yourself and ask the question yourself. Otherwise, you're also free to ask questions in the chat. One of my, after the initial introduction to ILO Convention 190, it was impressive how the scope of it and the ambition of it. So one comes to think like, it looks like a game changer, but you know, in practice, any thoughts from the three of you, like how can we help to make it a game changer, not only on paper, but to put it to use, or in the best way, or support its implementation? Anyone who dares to go first?
Well, that I can answer, but perhaps with a question to my other colleagues in the panel. What difference do you feel, or do you think that the convention can make in practice, from your very practical work and practical perspective? I know I've seen some troubles from the Swedish legislative perspectives, and the fact that it is very broad. It has a very broad scope, and we still have quite high ambitions to strengthen the Swedish legislation, but it is difficult. So working with employers and organizations, what do you feel is the best way to put it in practice? Because I believe it has the work. I mean, I look at it from the legislator's perspective, but it has to be known of and put into practice at the local organizations. That's very important. So, what is your view?
You want to go first, Isadora?
Sure. No, I completely agree with you. You're in terms of the broad scope of the convention, and sometimes I think the difficulty for employers to know how they can actually take actions. I think engaging in some programs directly on the ground, so being at HERrespect on others, is one way. But also engaging and collaborating with other employers and companies to add some pressure into the governments to take actions. I think that's also another way. So I think this kind of collaborative and like stakeholder engagement together, kind of making sure like where are the different governments taking that forward, as you said. So I think there are I see really like two different ways. One, what are the things they can do themselves in their supply chain? And I think that's where we see a lot of companies approaching us, like saying like, we're very interested in working with you for that. And another way, and other questions that we get is like, actually, how can we get involved to make sure that this is pushed forward? So I think there are like, different ways that they can be engaged, and there are different platforms that can allow them to do that.
Sonia, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yes, I think First and foremost, India has not ratified it. So so how it is going to be used is it's a secondary concern, and we work with trade unions who possibly only understand what C190 is, and it is about eliminating violence and harassment in supply chain. But they are not aware of the nitty-gritties of it. What is it all about? How is it going to impact? How are you going to roll it out? So until and unless there is a consultative process to even understand that this kind of a convention is going to help people on the ground, I am not sure how having a convention is going to help, because it is again something which is going to be on the shelf gathering dust. Because what we know, the women workers, they don't know what the sexual harassment law is within the country. So most of them don't even know that. So talking about C190 is a very distant dream for a lot of them. So there needs to be a practical approach when you're talking about C190, because unless it is a binding agreement and there's some kind of, let me be honest, there needs to be some pressure on the government and in turn the government, if it is ratified, the government can put some pressure on the suppliers, and the brands can put pressure on the suppliers and otherwise. But till the time we reach that stage, I am not sure how long the journey is going to be. I'm not sure whether India will ratify it this year or next year, in the next 5 years or ever. It's very difficult for us. I think it makes sense for us to at least strengthen what we have. I think that itself is not being implemented, and there needs to be more push within the brands, the suppliers, the government to actually implement the existing law that we have, to disseminate it to the people so that they can know how to access it. And what is more important is reporting about such cases. That is actually not happening. Nobody even knows how many cases of harassment are even reported and what happens to them. So this is my opinion.
Do you mean like brands should talk about more to what extent they have problems regarding harassment in their supply chain, that this should be part of transparency to show the extent of the challenges?
Yes, actually what we have observed, that the moment you talk to brands about wages, they don't want to talk to you. When you talk to them about living wages, they just say, no, we don't want to talk to you. But the moment you talk about gender-based violence in their supply chain, they see it as a very big blotch in their brand image. And then the moment SLD with Asia Floor Wage Alliance, we brought about brand targeted reports, and which was launched in the ILC in 2018, and it was on three brands, H&M, Gap, and Walmart. And the moment that report was launched, I think a lot of these brands actually approached Asia Floor Wage to discuss how gender-based violence can be addressed within their supply chain. But all this while, when we were talking about living wages, they were not coming to talk to us about it. So I think brands are conscious about procuring from a supply chain which is free from gender-based violence, but they are not very proactive in investing in making their supply chain free from gender-based violence or creating safe workspaces for women. And that is something which we have not seen. We do not have a good practice in front of us to actually showcase and replicate.
Talking about the buying companies, because now we've had a lot of examples of what women in the factories and the fields can do, and what you can do with management there. So big focus on the production countries, but I think an interesting question from the Ethical Trading Initiative Sweden perspective is, what can the buying companies do themselves? Are there practices they should adopt in order to support this work? I mean, not only by paying for trainings, but other things like buying practices, or I think you mentioned, Sonia, transparency, but your thoughts on what the Swedish buying companies can do to support this work?
I'm not sure whether you're following a recent case which happened in the H&M supply chain. And H&M is one of the biggest Swedish brands, and it basically has around 140 suppliers in India that it procures from. So there was a case of rape and murder in one of the factories in down south, and there is they actually came forward to do an independent investigation. But what we know from our source that it was just not one case. The factory has a history of having such cases, and it was just that the first time it came out in the open. So when you are talking about, let's say, social audits, and in most cases we've seen that these social audits are it happens within the premise of the factory. I have had the experience of imparting trainings to workers, to garment workers within a specific factory that's supplied to Gap. And it is not very easy, because you'll always have the factory management people around you. So they will be listening everything that you say. So you have no choice but to say that, yes, do you have violence within the factory? They will say no. Is your wages paid? Yes. Do you have do you actually get overtime? No. Do you get money for your overtime? So everything is going to be yes. And it has come from these social or third party social auditors also, that we need to have off-site interviews with the workers. Now, why are the brands not investing for these off-site interviews? It is only then that they will come to know that how can they even fare their supplier. If they have to actually say that this supplier is of the first grade, second grade, or whatever, needs improvement, they need to invest, because most of these social auditors say that there is not enough investment for off-site interviews. So if that is not happening, then it feels that the brands are actually doing it because it is, they want to show that, yes, we follow a due diligence. But how well they are doing it, they are not even investigating on that.
Yeah. Now I know from own experience that building the trust is extremely important, even when it comes to having third-party complaints mechanisms to get workers to trust them, to use them. But in the HERproject, how are you trying to address the challenges of getting the workers' trust? Because I guess this is a bit of a also supported by the management at the factories you work with.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you for that question. And just maybe to answer to what Sonia was saying before in terms of having offsite interviews or audits, I think that's extremely important. And for example, in the need assessment we are doing now in Bangladesh at the moment that we're going to do to understand a little bit more the needs and the situation, we are conducting most of the interviews and focus group outside of the scopes of the workplace, because we of course know that that's where they're able to open up more. So I just wanted to second that point, that I think having this kind of intervention outside and inside the factories is absolutely necessary to understand what's actually happening. And in terms of our own intervention in the factory and how we manage to create safe space and create trust where workers can open up, of course, we work in collaborations always with brands, companies, and with the factories. But the sessions that we run, as I mentioned, are separated. So we just run sessions where there are only female workers, sessions where there are only male workers, and sessions where there are only managers. And what we really discussed from the very beginning is that in the sessions for the workers, we do not want any managers there. Because that's extremely important, because we need the workers to feel that they are safe, that they can freely talk And even so, it's difficult, of course, because, you know, like there are other workers and they might not feel comfortable or at ease at the beginning. And that's why, as I said, we start by having modules that are about communication. You know, we really try to create an environment where they feel comfortable before we really address violence and sexual harassment. But we make sure that everything that, of course, is said within those sessions stays in those sessions. We do not disclose any information, and we also try to make sure that they are okay with, you know, like discussing these issues. And our NGO partners that we work with are very experienced NGO partners, knowing how to handle the situation. So we also very much rely on their expertise, you know, on how to create this kind of safe spaces. But it's definitely a concern, I think, and it's definitely something that we all need to be aware of, especially I think for baselines. For example, for us, we've had the case in the past where, and that reminded me what Sonia said, in the baseline, in one factory, the management had prompted the workers to say that there were no issues. And so, you know, like all workers said that no, like there's no violence, there's no harassment, everything is fine. And of course, then when we run the sessions and so on, then you discover things. But I think, of course, we all need to be very aware that, you know, those are very sensitive topics and they are power dynamics. And so you need to have an intervention that is going to have the opportunity for people to feel safe, and, you know, that they feel that they can open up and that there will be no repercussion for them. I think that's really important, and no retaliation.
Thanks. Do you think that the work in Sweden with Convention 190 can actually help push Swedish companies to work with this also in their global supply chains?
Well, yes, I would. I would have to say yes, wouldn't I? No, but actually, working with this convention and this state government investigation, it makes it very clear that we still have a lot to do, even in the Swedish context. But working with our own instruments and working towards employers, making them aware. I've heard the word awareness, raising awareness a lot during this hour. I think it's extremely important that we raise awareness, and we raise awareness among employers of their duties and of the convention as well, because then they can actually put pressure. They need to understand that their responsibility doesn't stop within the borders of our country, of Sweden, but we have to follow we have to follow the convention, well, wherever the Swedish companies are active. So I think it's extremely important to try to change or to make the national legislation stronger, but also to raise the awareness of the convention. Of course, it is always a risk that it will become a shelf-warming document. But the more we talk about it at the national level, and the more we can actually be active in pursuing the convention's goals throughout the world, or throughout the economy, wherever we're active. So I'm actually quite positive.
I think that's a good place to end with a quite positive comment. That and also I hope we all bring with us some very practical, hands-on advice from Sonia and Isadora. We'll send out the presentations. I know there are links to several good resources on how to work with that. And you can, of course, contact us at ETI Sweden if you want to get in contact with Isadora, Joa, or Sonia to follow up on these conversations. And I hope this will just be the start of more interesting work and fruitful work on this topic in our global supply chains. And with that, I'd like to say big thank you to our three expert guests, Isadora, Joa, and Sonia. Thanks so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Henrik.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.